It's amazing to think that for a lot of people, drastically improving health and performance could be as simple as just switching to the right shoe. See, most of us wear shoes with a large heel, a thick sole, a thick squishy sole, and a narrow toe box, like one of these. It's a good shoe, by the way, just not as good as it could be. And these shoes are in contrast to what we call minimal shoes or barefoot shoes. These are shoes with a wide toe box, absolutely no heel, a very minimal sole that essentially mimic going barefoot, and obviously actually going barefoot also has the same benefits. It's why I've been wearing barefoot shoes now for over 2 years, and I've seen incredible results across the board, and it's why I recommend it to everybody else as well. So a key thing to understand is the way that a barefoot shoe will impact on your biomechanics. So with a shoe like this, an old-fashioned traditional shoe, you have this large heel, and what this does is it encourages you to strike the ground with your heel, like so. By having this large heel and by hitting the ground with your heel first, you're therefore sticking your leg out in front of you, fully extended at the knee. Therefore you can't bend the knee to absorb any of the impact, and that jolt has nowhere to go but up through your leg in a barefoot shoe, like this one. You don't land with your heel because there's not much padding on the heel, it hurts. Therefore you're going to land the way that you naturally would land if you're running in barefoot, you know, the way we evolved to do. So instead you're going to land on the forefoot, like so, directly underneath your centre of gravity and with your knee bent, and your hip and your knee are therefore able to absorb that impact like a spring. This is what we were designed to do. It's good for building tendon strength, and at the same time it's far less likely to lead to injury and deterioration over time. One of the first and most important things we need to consider when thinking about barefoot shoes and barefoot running in general is the way that it affects your toes. Because in a barefoot shoe or a minimal shoe, you have a much wider toe box. What this means is that the toes can splay as they're supposed to. So imagine that your foot lands in a small hole or a small ditch. What would normally happen if you were in bare feet is that your toes would splay out, they'd fill that hole, and this would give you the purchase and the grip necessary to then push yourself off and continue running anyways. However, if you have a very narrow toe box and you're essentially balanced on this wedge of foam, then your foot will either fit in there entirely or fit in there partially and tip, or it won't fit in there at all. Either way, you've got a much less secure grip on the ground. You're far more likely to tilt and tip your ankle, which can really hurt. This can actually change the shape and structure of your foot over time. If you look at someone who wears barefoot shoes, you'll notice that they have wider splayed toes that look like they've stretched out because they've got room to breathe. However, if you look at anyone else who wears regular shoes with a narrow toe box, the toes are much more bunched together, they might look cramped and bent over, and obviously this isn't how they're supposed to look. And as if that weren't enough, this can even impact your performance negatively because it prevents you from pushing off of your toes as you're supposed to when you run. For starters, when you're in big heeled shoes, your feet are basically pointing downwards such that you're already in a state of plantar flexion. Your feet are pushing off the ground even when you're just standing still. This gives you less space to push off further, and it essentially renders the toes pretty much useless when it comes to running and performance. This is a big problem because we know that training the muscles that control the big toe and the four little toes, the hallucis longus and the flexor digitorum longus, can actually improve physical performance, can improve running speed and jumping height. This isn't just speculation. Studies have shown that wearing barefoot shoes whilst training can actually improve your performance whether in barefoot shoes or not, increasing running times, reducing fatigue, and reducing your ground contact time as you spring off the ground much more quickly. So let's take a break from those chilled vibes to relax with a nice cup of coffee. This one being from Jarvi, who of course are the sponsors of today's video. This stuff comes in a bottle with a liquid that you can just drop into your coffee. You can add 1 or 2 teaspoons and then just mix it in with some milk, with some hot water, maybe add a little bit of honey if that's your jam, and you'll end up with a really tasty coffee at the end of it. And it genuinely is a lot nicer than just an instant coffee, and it's a lot more convenient to make at the same time. You don't end up with those little grains floating in it. Also happens to be dairy-free, sugar-free, plant-powered, non-GMO, and ethically sourced. My favourite that I've tried so far is this 100% Arabica artisan roasted. If you guys love coffee, then I definitely recommend giving it a go, giving it a try. And if you go to www.buy.jarvicoffee.com/Bioneer, which is linked in the description down below, by the way, then you can get 25% off your order if you use my code, which is also Bioneer. And now back to wandering around a large manor house, as you do. By the way guys, I'm here filming today at the beautiful Middle Aston house where they very kindly allowed me to come and film and even fly my drone, which is rare. The grounds are absolutely beautiful, and my parents stayed here the other weekend and they said that it was a wonderful experience. So if you're in the Oxfordshire area and you're looking for a place to stay, then I highly recommend checking it out. And another key thing to consider here is how regular shoes actually cut off your senses. You lose a whole bunch of proprioception. So if you had bare feet and you were running, you'd be able to feel the texture and the shape of the ground underneath, how slippy it was, even the temperature. All this information then allows you to make tiny adjustments in your stance, in the amount of force you're producing, in which muscles are contracting and how much, which would allow you to essentially push off of the ground in the optimal way. If you take away this proprioception by essentially standing on the same foam block wherever you are, then you're not able to do this, and therefore you're essentially running with some of your senses missing. It's like running blindfolded. This is something I noticed in a big way the first time that I wore barefoot shoes, which were the 5-finger shoes. Put on the shoes, I went balancing along a beam, and I could feel the shape of the beam underneath my feet. Over time, these effects compound, and you might find that you actually lose that sense in your feet. Don't use it, and you lose it. So that might mean that even then when you're walking around barefoot around the house, you might have less sensitivity. You might be less aware of what's underneath your foot. And this won't cut it as training anyways, because your floor around your house is pretty much flat and carpeted or wood, so there's not really much useful information coming in. Now imagine that you're a little bit older, you've reached advanced years, congratulations, you're walking down the stairs. How much more likely do you think it is that you're going to fall down the stairs if you've lost that sensitivity in your feet? And this might even be bad for the brain, because you're essentially processing less information every single minute of the day. Less information is coming in, your brain's working less hard, therefore it's going to deteriorate faster. Barefoot running, or running in minimal shoes, makes trail running far more viable because you're now able to feel the ground beneath you without twisting your ankle. This in turn can increase proprioception in the ankles. Check out my video on ankle strengthening, and this can therefore improve our ability to produce energy and reduce our ground contact time. This is another reason that those people who trained with bare feet actually saw faster running and greater overall improvement. Another big drawback of traditional footwear is what it does for your mobility. Because essentially by having your heel slightly lifted off the ground, you're constantly shortening your calves. I mean, your calves are in a shortened position for the entire day. So is it any wonder that you struggle to get into a deep squat without falling backwards due to tight ankles, or that you experience knee pain? Attempting things like a squat in barefoot shoes immediately makes those movements more authentic, because you're not putting yourself at that advantaged angle. I do believe there's a time and a place for things like squat shoes or squat blocks that elevate your heel slightly, allowing for an easier range of motion so that you can pump out more repetitions without putting any strain on your joints before you've got that mobility, or just when you're taking it a bit easier. However, I do think you should be able to get into a deep squat. As I said in the previous video, I think this is a fundamental human movement. If you can't get into it, you're essentially not able to use your body as it was intended. This is going to translate to things like lower jump height and a greater chance of pain and injury. And who knows what it does for the anterior tibialis. This is in a constantly stretched position, and I can only imagine that it's similar to the effect that sitting has on the glutes, where they're constantly stretched, weak and inactive. Again, is it any wonder that we're constantly hurting our knees? Now, in terms of which shoes you could get, like I say, these are Vivo Barefoot shoes, and I'm a big fan of these. They're a little bit more on the pricey side, but they last for ages, they're comfortable, and at the same time, they don't look too weird. I've got this pair here, which is my very well-loved ones for, you know, sports, trail running, etc. And these things have been really good to me. They've lasted for over 2 years, I think now. Like I say, there's loads of other brands. Feiyu is a really popular one, very minimal shoe, much more affordable. Another great barefoot company that I just discovered is Based, and they make some really comfortable barefoot shoes. And just do a quick Google, you'll find there's loads of options out there. Now what I will say is, if you're going to start wearing barefoot shoes, don't just throw on a pair of barefoot shoes and go for a sprint round the block on concrete, because this is a quick fire way to really injure your knee. It's what I did, and yeah, I had a bad knee for quite a long time after that. You've got to ease into this. It's not something you're used to unless you have been doing it, and so you've got to do it gently. That means slow runs, that means not wearing it 24/7 right away. At the same time, it means initially starting on softer ground. This is the other thing you need to consider, is that when we were barefoot, we had softer floor naturally, so we're not necessarily equipped to deal with those hard surfaces. But as long as you're not sprinting on concrete right away, you can build up to this gently. And when you're landing on your forefoot, you're actually going to be protecting yourself, like I say. So it's perfectly viable, just don't launch in there right away. Take it slowly, ease into it, and like I say, always listen to your body. What I'd really like to ram home is just what a finely tuned instrument the human body is, and how our attempts to improve on it are almost always misguided at best. In his book Born to Walk, author James Earls describes how our bodies evolved to allow maximum efficiency when walking, to allow us to walk with nearly zero conscious thought and whilst using very little energy. This is possible thanks to the constant tension held throughout our body by the fascial system. This is called tensegrity. Essentially, your body's not just a stack of joints on top of each other like a tower of blocks. We maintain tension in order to stay upright, and that's why you collapse if you relax. Fascia and connective tissue contain lots and lots of mechanoreceptors that can sense changes in force and length, etc. And these allow us to respond to tiny changes in our position and our gait and not even have to think about it via inbuilt reflexes. So for example, when you lift your foot off the ground, you have a natural reflex to dorsiflex, to lift your foot upwards. This of course is to prevent you from scuffing your toe and catching on anything. And then when your heel touches the ground, that change in length is sensed by the fascia and you begin to plantar flex. In other words, you push your toes downwards so that you can stand flat on the floor. This all happens without us even thinking about it. Likewise, the plantar reflex means that when you stimulate the bottom of the foot, you naturally grip with your toes. So if you push on a baby's foot on the bottom, they'll naturally grip with their toes. This, of course, is to provide that extra grip so we can push off the ground. Even that looseness of the skeleton is in service of this, so that when you land, whether you're running or whether you're jumping, your bones will actually move slightly within your body. And not only does this send more signals throughout the body, it even preloads the tendons, creates a tiny stretch on them so that you can then return that energy more powerfully without having to contract the muscles at all. This is a very energy efficient way to walk. There are thousands of examples of reflexes like this that have evolved over thousands and thousands of years. And these allow us to walk whilst thinking about other things, whilst maintaining energy, which is one of the ways that we got ahead as a human species. And it starts with the feet, because your feet are what hit the floor first, and that's why they and your ankles are so rich with muscle spindles and mechanoreceptors. But sure, you go ahead and wear your nice comfy shoes. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting, guys. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of barefoot shoes and whether this is something that you wear or you're going to start wearing after watching this video. If you like this training that looks at more than just your aesthetics or your performance and a few lifts, then you might enjoy my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training 2.0, the Protein Performance System. That's an 80+ page ebook and a over 2 hour long video tutorial that shows you all the moves and how to do them, and it'll address every aspect of your performance in one single program. I'll put a link to that in the description down below. And either way, thank you so much for watching this one, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.